Okay, good morning. We have some very important work sessions this morning. And today is the 24th of July. The month is quickly passing us by. So I want to welcome the YWCA. Is there any other introduction? So after my most recent tour, I thought it was really important for the entirety of the council. I don't know how many other counselors were able to do the tour, but there's so much need and you're doing such great work out in the community. So take it from here.
Now it is. Oh, yay. Look at that. Well, thank you. I am Brittany Lassane. I'm the Chief Executive Officer at YWCA Clark County. And we are very excited to be here today to share about our work. We do a lot of things at YWCA, and what we're really focusing on today is our domestic violence work. And so you can go to the second slide. Thank you. I know this is a lot of text, but we wanted to start out just with the definitions of domestic violence and sexual violence so that we're all on the same page of where YWCA is serving and what that looks like. So I'm just going to read this for a second, and I swear that's the longest part of the whole presentation. So domestic violence is a pattern of abusive behavior in any relationship that is used by one partner to gain or maintain power and control over another person. Domestic violence can be physical, sexual, emotional, economic, financial, psychological, spiritual, or technological actions or threats of actions are other patterns of coercive behavior that influence another person. This includes any behaviors that intimidate, manipulate, humiliate, isolate, frighten, terrorize, coerce, threaten, blame, hurt, injure, or wound someone with the underlying intent to control the other person. Intimate partner violence is a type of domestic violence where a current or former intimate partner engages in harmful actions and behaviors to gain power and control. So at YWCA, we have a domestic violence program, and then we are unique in that we also have a sexual assault program, and they are two separate programs. However, it is not abnormal for participants to access both programs depending on what the experience is that they are coming with. So when we look at sexual violence, it is when someone forces or manipulates another into unwanted activity without their freely given consent or against someone who is unable to consent or refuse. Reasons some might not consent include fear, age, illness, disability, and/or influence of alcohol or other drugs. Anyone can experience sexual violence. Forms of sexual violence include rape or sexual assault, child sexual assault and incest, unwanted sexual contact or touching, sexual harassment, sexual exploitation, exposing genitals to others without consent, public masturbation, watching someone in a private act without their knowledge or permission, and forcing or coercing a victim to engage in sexual acts with a third party. So I talked a little bit how we have both programs, and there can be intersectionality when someone is coming and accessing. Maybe they've experienced in their intimate partner relationship sexual violence and other forms of domestic violence. And so they might come in and access initially our sexual assault program and then get referred over to our domestic violence program and receiving services at the same time. And so for today, we're really focusing on our domestic violence program, but we also want you to keep in mind that the people accessing the domestic violence program could also be experiencing sexual violence as well. Next slide. Additionally, I wanted to say that we will leave a lot of time at the end for questions, so we just ask that you hold your questions until the end of the presentation. So looking at our SafeChoice domestic violence program, this last year, we served 966 people in the domestic violence program. And we have lots of different ways that people can access it. We're really known for our emergency domestic violence shelter. That's often what people think of when they think of YWCA. We also have our 24-hour domestic violence hotline. And to give you a little bit of thought or like understanding of how active that line is, last year we received 8,961 calls to the line. And so it is a very active line and is constant throughout the day. We also have housing programs that people can access. We have walk-in hours at our community office that people can come into. We provide legal advocacy, protection order support, and legal referrals. We partner with Clark County Volunteer Lawyers Program for our legal referrals. We have a new addition to our program called the Domestic Violence High Risk Team, which I'm going to talk more about here in a moment. We also offer support groups, parenting classes, outreach and education, and information and referral to community partners. Next slide. So as I mentioned on the previous slide, a new addition to YWCA is our Domestic Violence High Risk Team. And this was really in response to the increase in homicides that we've experienced here in Clark County. I put a couple numbers on here, and I want to be clear that these numbers represent intimate partner violence homicides, and suicides by the perpetrator are not represented in these numbers. So in 2022, we had 2 homicides, and then in 2023, we had 9. And then currently in this year, we've experienced 3 homicides. And the state of Washington put out a RFP for the Domestic Violence High Risk Team, and we applied for it and were awarded, and are currently in the process of getting ready for implementation with that. It's a collaboration with the Clark County Sheriff's Office and the Vancouver Police Department. The Domestic Violence High Risk Team model was created with the understanding that when domestic violence response systems share information and work together, they have a greater impact than when they operate in silos. So high-risk cases are monitored by a multidisciplinary team, and we share information and implement coordinated intervention to mitigate the danger. There's really 4 components to it, and it is a nationally recognized prevention framework, and cities and counties that have implemented it have seen a decrease in homicides. So the 4 components is early identification of the most dangerous cases through evidence-based risk assessment. So there's a danger assessment that the team implements, and then increased access to supportive services for high-risk victims, increased offender monitoring and accountability, and a coordinated response to high-risk cases through a multidisciplinary team. So over the last several months, we've been working with the Geiger Institute that has the training for the danger assessment and partnering with law enforcement here in our county and our city, and we're getting ready to implement the program in October.
Good morning, all. My name is Beth Lantry. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm Vice President of Domestic Violence and Programs with YWCA Clark County. Thanks again for having us here today. We're very excited to share program information with you and appreciate the time. I'm going to take over some additional slides. You can go, thank you, can we go next slide. So I'm going to talk about our housing programs, and housing programs are where the majority of Clark County funds go to within YWCA Clark County. So within our housing programs, we offer rapid rehousing, transitional housing, and eviction prevention services. We currently still do have a motel voucher program, but we are preparing to wind down that program, which is why it's not included and emphasized here. So rapid rehousing, we began in fall 2021 during COVID. That began with support from Clark County and funds from Clark County. We have housed 85 people since inception of the program through rapid rehousing models. and we've now expanded to additional funding sources outside of county funds as well. Transitional housing began in fall of 2022, also began with Clark County funds, and again has grown outside of county funds, and we have housed 58 people through this program. Eviction prevention began in spring 2024, also began with Clark County funds, and we have served 53 people to date. Next slide, please. For our SafeChoice shelter, again, as Brittany mentioned, one of the programs that we are most known for, I wanted to make sure that we cover some highlights. For those of you that participated in the tour, this may be a little bit of a refresher, but we are a gender-inclusive and pet-friendly facility, one of very few pet-friendly shelters across the state of Washington, and very few across nationally. There are some movements to increase pet-friendly shelters, especially for DV survivors, given that animal abuse is frequent in domestic violence situations. We can serve up to 44 individuals at any one time, and that is if we have every single bed utilized in rooms. We have 14 rooms in total. The 14 family rooms references that each household gets their own room, and we do not have persons outside of households sharing rooms. So it is a very trauma-informed space with bedrooms, private bathrooms that are not meant for multiple household use. It's single-family use style bathrooms and other spaces to create a trauma-informed space. People who are eligible to receive shelter from this program must be fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence and in need of shelter. We do our screenings through our hotline when space is available, and we communicate those screenings and openings via email post to our internal staff, and then we have an external partner mailing list, which is going to include a lot of the agencies that you're familiar with, so other DV providers, other shelters, Council for the Homeless, outreach teams, homeless school liaisons, and other key stakeholders that have expressed an interest in knowing when SafeChoice Shelter has space available. We're happy to add any persons to that list at any time as well. We do not have maximum length of stay, and our average length of stay is still around 60 days. So we still do see a shorter length of stay compared to some other programs. I also want to note that some of the critical services that we provide include safety planning, civil legal advocacy, emotional support, emergency financial assistance, housing assistance, support groups, tangible goods, diapers, shampoo, conditioners, toothpaste, all those things, emergency clothing, and family service support through our family services program. Next slide, please. This page includes our shelter exits and outcomes, so some statistics for your review. And this is going to be a 5-year look. So we're into 2024, just noting that that is a half-year completion. We're not yet complete with the 2024 year. So you can see that we have served 160 BIPOC participants, exited shelter, and 161 white participants who have exited shelter, and then there's breakdown on those stats. You can see that they're pretty similar as far as our positive outcomes and where people are going, things of that sort. There is a slight difference for BIPOC households exiting to safe and permanent housing, and there can be a variety of reasons why we're seeing that slight difference. One important thing to note is that we're not seeing a disproportionate number of BIPOC households seeing negative exits, so we do feel that our program is demonstrating that we are able to provide culturally responsive, inclusive space that are welcoming to all populations, all demographics, and we're very proud of our outcomes. We're very proud that we exceed the 50% minimum that is the county goal for exits to permanent housing. And we have done that again this year as well and submitted our reports to the county, so we have far exceeded it, and we're very proud. There's some additional information for stats. So between the years 2019 2024, we had 827 people in shelter. The majority of those included children. We do have our BIPOC populations broken down. So that included 16.9% African American Black households, 2.5 Asian households, 3.7 Native American, Alaskan Native, 3.1 Pacific Islander, Native Hawaiian, 10.5 multiracial, and 12 other race. We do serve a majority of female-identified survivors. We do serve a majority of extremely low income or 30% or less AMI, area median income households. And the majority of ages includes persons 25 to 59 years old for primary survivor. Next page, please. I have some additional stats here from our shelter program. So you can see that over time, we have increased the percentages of Clark County residents that we are serving in the program. So our shelter is unique in that we receive different funding sources outside of Clark County. We're going to review some of that funding information in just a bit. And we are also meant to serve survivors from all areas, not just Clark County. We do recognize that we are the only domestic violence shelter in Clark County, and we do want to prioritize local survivors. We also recognize that there's reasons why local survivors cannot safely stay in our shelter program, such as proximity to their prior residence, affiliations, or power that the abuser may have within the community. If the abuser knows where the shelter location is through work or social circles, it is generally not safe for that survivor to stay here locally. We have served many Clark County survivors who were not able to stay safely in our shelter due to some of these increased safety concerns, and we worked with other programs in Oregon and Washington to rehouse folks and get them relocated to safe spaces in ways that made sense for them and their situation. Oh, and also just to note, on this slide, if we go back one, please, Michelle. Thank you. So for the final year, if you see visually, you'll see the dip for 2024, and you can still see that we're still at 76%. The dip only reflects that we're halfway through the year, so it's not a full year. I just wanted to note that visually it looks like it's a decline. It is not. We are still committed to that 50% minimum, and we're still on par to be around 70 to 80% of Clark County residents served this year. Next slide. Thank you. So our shelter operating budget has increased significantly over the last few years. This slide indicates our fiscal year 19 revenue and our fiscal year 25 operating budgets as well. So some of these increases are due to the fact that we had a shelter renovation. So we've moved from 10 shelter beds in fiscal year 19 to, 10 rooms, not beds. It was about 32 beds, 10 rooms, and now we are 14 rooms, 44 beds. So that is a significant increase in the number of people. There's also updates to the building that impacted cost on utilities, including finally adding efficient air conditioning and heating to that building. Tell you before, when it was 100 degrees, it was ridiculous in there. So hot, the building's pretty old. There was just portable air conditioners. Is so much nicer. It's so much safer for families to be in comfortable spaces with adequate heating and cooling, amongst all the other wonderful things that happen through renovation. But generally speaking, the costs for this increase include living wage cost, so operation cost in general. Our renovation, again, did move us from 10 rooms to 14 rooms, increasing our ability to offer more shelter space. So that includes additional utility bills and administrative costs. And then we increased staffing to serve participants more effectively and improve our outcomes. And this has had a direct impact on cost as well. So like our family services is an expanded and new program, and we're offering more services to families and focusing supports for the caregivers and their children. Next slide, please. This page is going to go over our shelter funding sources. So as you can see on this page, we have our foundation grants about 13%. We do have unfunded portions about 20%. Washington State 22%, Clark County 12%, and City of Vancouver 34%. And this is for fiscal year 25, the fiscal year that has just begun July 1st. So the monies that are coming into the shelter program are both competitive through RFA and RFP processes. Some are continuing awards, some are private donations. There are a variety of funding sources and manners in which we are able to secure those funds to operate the shelter. I also have on here other domestic violence victim service providers in Southwest Washington. So one of our largest other programs is going to include Cowlitz Indian Tribe Pathways to Healing. There's also the Emergency Support Shelter, Cowlitz County. There's Community County Council on Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault, Inner Beauty and You, National Women's Coalition Against Violence and Exploitation, or YWCA as you may know it, Domestic Violence Prosecutor's Office, the DVPC, and the Vancouver Police Department DV Unit. And then our final slide just has our contact information, names, in case there's any follow-up questions. And I think we're pretty close to time, but if you do have questions, we'd love to hear them.
Well, thank you so much for that in-depth presentation. I have a few questions, but I want to go to my fellow council members first for questions. Any from the dais, Sue? Do you have any?
Yes, I have a few. First, thanks so much for your work. It's really impressive. I wasn't able to go on the tour, but I have been to your fundraising dinner, and that's most impressive as well. I was wondering, the unfunded on that slide that says that just over 200,000, is that raised through fundraising, or I'm just kind of curious about your unmet need and if the demand is really a great deal more than you're able, even though you're increased and doing a wonderful job. I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, the unfunded part is an unmet need that then we rely on our philanthropy and our fundraising. So when you look at the foundation grants, those are going to be grants that are already committed, and then we work to fundraise that extra $200,000, whether it's through foundation grants, other state or local government grants that might come available, or through our event sometimes that's general operating, so it can go to the deficit of all of our programs. But it is something that each year we're looking at, how are we going to meet that need. We do also have some an investment portfolio that we can pull a little bit out of, but it's a smaller amount, around $50,000.
And in terms of the community of need, is there a lot more need than you're able to serve?
Yes, by far. Across programs, we always see a higher request for services than we are able to provide. So for shelter, for example, we are seeing an increase in request for single-person shelter space in our domestic violence program. We have 2 dedicated rooms for singles and 12 dedicated rooms for families. So we're reviewing that process to see if we need to make a change. However, we also recognize that family homelessness and family domestic violence survivors with children is a significant need in our community. So we just want to be very intentional with any changes that occur and try to balance out what the community needs, what we're seeing, residents' requests, and so on.
Great. And I'm wondering about the children when there's a family that comes in. Are they able to, I'm just wondering what schools they may do. Are they able to go to their regular schools to provide some measure of stability?
Yes, thankfully with McKinney-Vento Act and homeless student liaisons through the schools, which are just a blessing to have those staff in schools and their support, we are able to work with them to continue enrollment in their current school, or we can look at changing schools if there's a significant safety concern with that.
Great. I'm happy to hear that. And then just since you mentioned that abusing pets can be an indicator, I wonder if you have connected with like Clark County Animal Control, or if they could be provide some early indications and information.
We do. We actively partner with Clark County Humane Society So the humane societies locally that are operating in this jurisdiction, we have active partnerships with for a variety of services. And anyone is able to refer to our shelter and to our services when they're concerned about a friend, a family member, encouraging them to go or seeking services from themselves. There's no right or wrong way to access services. When someone says, I need help, we will try our best to find ways to help them, and if we cannot, we will find another agency who may be able to do so.
Thanks so much.
Other questions
A follow-up
online?
question as well.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Karen.
I first of all commend you as well for the work that you're doing, and I'm really very familiar with it because my very first professional position, and this was ever so many years ago, was as executive director of the Texas Commission on the Status of Women for the governor. And because the topic of domestic violence is a bipartisan one for sure, we had that as our major project. One of the things that I did in connection with that was to write for the governor a book entitled Children Within the Cycle, because one of the very sad things is that the children who witness domestic violence at home too often become abusers or abused themselves in the future when they grow up and have a partner. I wondered if you have programs that deal with that topic, maybe by working with the children when they're with you, or following them in the future, or collecting data even on this topic.
Thank you, Councilor Bowerman. And yes, we do. We recognize that as well, and the harm that domestic violence can have on children and how that can create generational impacts. We're actually very proud of a new service that we have under our Family Services program within SafeChoice to partner with Children's Home Society and offer a parenting class called A Circle of Security. This is a specific class with a specific curriculum. It is a closed group, so we do have signups going through this. It has been exceedingly popular. We usually have far more requests than we are able to offer spaces, but we're so far able to offer those courses quarterly in partnership with Children's Home Society. We're currently doing those with private funds, and we're hoping to explore some public fund opportunities to expand and sustain that program. Hopefully have it around for a long time, and it's been very effective and a great way to reach parents with young kids that are experiencing things that can be challenging, and support parents in finding ways to engage with their children and help with behaviors.
I'll also add that we have a prevention program that works with middle schoolers and high schoolers in identifying what healthy behaviors look like, healthy relationships look like, what is consent, and also teaching them how they can hold themselves accountable and their peers accountable, and how when a boundary is crossed, it's how to repair. It's not the end of the world. We're not all bad or good, and how can we move forward, correct that, and continue to build on having a healthy relationship.
That's wonderful. And sometimes people don't realize that it's even, as you're doing, you said with high schoolers, that's so important, because these imprints from the experience in the family can be made even on teenagers who carry that forward then in their own behavior. So thank you for that work, and keep it up.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to expand that prevention programming. We're really proud that we were able to expand it during the pandemic from a position that was in our domestic violence program and one position in our sexual assault program to be an independent program that has 5 staff now.
Oh, great.
Well,
that's the only way really to stop that cycle. Thank you.
Glenn or Michelle?
I have a comment.
Please.
All right. Brittany, I was wondering if you could talk about when there are cases of domestic violence that are in the newspaper, or I think you mentioned when I was on my tour with Chair Medavagee, when something happens in the community that it spurs an onset of increased calls. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. Anytime that there is something in the media related to domestic violence, especially when a homicide happens, we do typically see an increase in people reaching out to our hotline or accessing our walk-ins. It's often that they are evaluating the circumstance that they're finding themselves in, their relationship, and if they're experiencing any warning signs around domestic violence. Sometimes they see that on the news and they are inclined to reach out for help. And so I know that we had done some media about a year ago around how we had seen about, I think it was either a 30 or 50% increase in phone calls to our hotline. And when we do experience a homicide, we do try to provide more support with our staff, knowing that there's going to be an increase for about a week or two of people reaching out.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, Glenn, did you have any questions?
Yes, I do. I have a couple questions. So first of all, thank you for being here today, and thank you for doing what you do. It's amazing work, very critical work. And I was very impressed when, I think it's probably over a year ago, when I toured the facility. It was still being remodeled, and I think the one thing that I remember was talking about the new animal cleaning area, you know, and we had a short conversation about how important it was that people are able to have animals come with them. It sometimes is their only lifeline, their only friendship, the only being that they can trust. So I remember being really inspired by that. I did have a question though, that you did mention that you are winding down your motel vouchers program, and I was curious what led to that decision.
So that program is coming, or will be coming to an end due to the end of the contract. So the funding for that program will be ending. So we're just preparing to wind down the program and spend up funds. We've also had some difficulty in finding willing vendors to participate in the program that offer rooms at prices that public funds can support. So there has been some challenges with vendor participation and making sure that we're balancing safe properties, responsive vendors, good relationships with utilizing public funds in the most responsible way, and not utilizing the most expensive hotel room, just recognizing that these are public funds and we want to be responsible stewards of those.
Great, thank you. And then my last question is, I was quite alarmed to see that you have about 9,000 calls a year. And what I'm wondering is, what does that translate in terms of lack of resources? So how many people are you having to say no to?
Far too many, far more than we should be saying no to. And it's not just shelter that we are saying no to for capacity. There's a huge demand for housing programs. A lot of survivors may not want to come into shelter, may not feel safe in shelter, even though we try to make every possible step appropriate to make that a safe and inclusive space. Some people just will not feel safe going into shelter, and there's a long list of reasons why that may be the case. Some people prefer to try to go into housing, would feel safer in their own housing, their own space, knowing that their kiddo has their own room with their own toys and hopefully a space to play, and it's theirs, it's their home. There's a lot of things that make sense with that. So the hotline receives calls for domestic violence, sexual assault, crisis intervention. We also are one of the only 24-hour hotlines that's available locally after Council for the Homeless and 211 phone lines close. So we also get a high number of general homeless calls, and we provide information referral support for people who are experiencing general homelessness or other types of crisis. We connect lots of folks to 911 services, to our community office, to other providers, as well as Clark County Crisis Services for people who are experiencing behavioral health or mental health needs.
Well, again, thank you so much for your work. And, it's just kind of a, sad conversation to talk about. This is such a critical need in our community, and we don't have enough resources to support it. Again, thank you for everything. Appreciate it.
So I'm going to go ahead and segue off that last comment, because that was the whole intent of having you come here, was to let us know what the need was and to make your ask known. I'm wondering where you're at on a mental health sales tax grant request in general, but obviously that's a whole different process, but I want to make sure that we're heading in that direction. So it's important for the public, and I'm sorry to say it is one of those times in the morning when the public's just not here. I don't know if there's any news reporters logged in and listening or going to listen to this. It's an education process, and I think the county council is pretty much aware of some of the general needs, but the public needs to know the very nature of what you do and what the need is. I spent many years as a prosecutor focusing in this area, mainly on children. Whether it was rape, murder, molestation, abuse, neglect, my focus was those crimes committed against children. And to the general public, for those who may be getting a jury summons soon, you have to know these crimes are committed in private. There generally are no witnesses. By the very nature of the crime, they're committed when people aren't around. And as to Karen Bowerman's comment, children they're there, and they're afraid, and they're traumatized. But it gets to the heart of the issue of the common misbelief that, just leave. Well, how does a child just leave? There's no way out. And most of the victims are female, most of the victims are women, but people don't recognize the inevitability of being trapped, of not knowing a way out, of not knowing where the help is. So I wanted to focus on two areas, your domestic violence high-risk team work and the 4 core components, and what needs you may still have, because the key is to have services widely known, readily available, and especially with our immigrant population that may distrust government entirely, much less law enforcement, and they don't gravitate towards those resources. What do we need more of to provide that outreach, to provide those support services, to provide help to show people that there is a way out from their situation?
Start on the first part that you said around the domestic violence high-risk teams. We know that just through the beginning work of it, that when we launch in October, that there'll be a considerable amount of people that are referred to us that are qualifying for that extra support because of how they're rating on the danger scale, and that they're at high risk of experiencing a homicide or lethal assault or near lethal assault. And so one of the things that we're currently navigating is how are we funding an additional position to provide that extra support. The funding that we received for the team does provide some assistance, but we know that we need additional staffing to support and provide that extra support to those individuals and families. And so that is a current need that we are navigating and still trying to figure out how we're going to meet. Did you have an additional thought?
And I'll add that just a general statement that we do appreciate the support, and we realize that money is hard to come by, and just recognizing the challenge that is present. These are still needs, and both BPD, Clark County Sheriff's Office, Domestic Violence Prosecution Center, we really appreciate their support and their collaboration with Domestic Violence High-Risk Team. And yes, a full-time position to effectively provide advocacy-based case management services to high-risk survivors is crucial for them actually getting adequate support to go through their situations, go through court processes, work with law enforcement, work with prosecutors, get the help that they need and want, and have good outcomes, be survivors, not victims.
Thanks for all that. So the other area I wanted to focus on is your shelter exits and outcomes. You have both a slide and then you gave us a separate handout on it, where you're showing 54%, almost 55% exited to safe permanent housing. That's a relatively solid number. It's better than most that we see reported by either Vancouver or our own community services programming. But I'm wondering, you have almost 19% exiting to temporary destinations, but of course we'd like to see those numbers much better. And the 27% that went to unsheltered homelessness, and then the caveat was, or unknown destination. So I'm wondering if you could give me some more detail. Are you just losing track of these people? They may be in a good living situation, you just lost track of them. Where do we do better? How do we do better with having that 54% number more like 85 or 90%? How do we ensure that people are getting long-term supportive housing versus what we're seeing right now?
Thank you, Chair. We do have, overall, I just want to note, we do have about an 80% exit to positive destinations. So permanent housing destinations is going to be a very specific definition. So programs like transitional housing, other shelters, rapid rehousing are not necessarily going to qualify because those are typically temporary homeless programs where someone still retains their homeless status while they're in those programs. So while it may be a very positive exit to go into that program and take the next step on their journey, it is not considered a permanent housing exit. I just want to note that as well. We also do see some unknown destinations. Some of this impact can be that people refuse to tell us where they may be going, and we do believe there's a variety of reasons for that. Some of the main reasons can include behavioral health, mental health needs that we are not able to adequately address. And we are hoping to grow our partnerships, and we are definitely looking at the mental health sales tax in ways that we can improve those services and support survivors with those needs. We also do see some survivors who may not be comfortable letting us know where they're going for a variety of reasons, either because there's concerns for judgment, for cultural reasons. It may be that some survivors are returning to their previous home, and they may feel that it's not safe to disclose that. We always support survivors, whether that's their wish to leave the relationship, to stay in the relationship, to try to improve, if they're trying to get therapy and treatment services for the person causing harm in that relationship. We always focus on survivor-led options while also trying to help people understand the lethality risks that they may be facing. And that domestic violence high-risk team is going to directly help with that and help with conversations around lethality concerns when we are safety planning with survivors. So yes, we are hoping to get those numbers lower. It's an ongoing effort to make sure that people know that we are safe. Regardless of where they're going, it's okay to tell us that, and that's an ongoing work with people who are experiencing high levels of trauma, and sometimes it takes the next shelter stay or the next engagement as people build their trust and rapport with us to know that we're not going to judge them regardless of decisions that they're making, and we are here to support them through anything that they might be going through, and that takes time. It does.
Thank you. Last questions before we move on to our next work session. Any last questions? Thank you so much for what you do, and I hope we can continue to help fill some of those gaps for you. So thanks again for the time you've spent with us this morning, both to educate the public as well as the council. Thank you.
Thank you.